Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we've got Steph. Hi, Steph. How are we doing?
I'm doing great, Manny. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's all good. Like I've mentioned off the podcast, I've been following you for a while now, and it's I'm thankful to be in the position where people like you come on the podcast and we can just chop it up and really get into some of the specific things that you do in the industry. But for those listening, if you just let us know who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are.
Awesome. All right. Yes, my name is Stephanie Mock. My current role is Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Performance at the University of Pittsburgh. I've had a few stops along the way. I started out as a collegiate volleyball player at West Virginia University. And that's where, once I finished up playing volleyball, I started my first strength and conditioning internship there, which I'm super lucky and grateful for. After that, I was at University of Pittsburgh as an intern a long, long time ago. I don't want to age myself too much. And then after Pitt, after that internship, I was lucky enough to land another internship at Clemson University, where I served a pretty long stint. I was there for 5 years. I was lucky to be able to kind of come in grassroots approach of being an intern, a graduate assistant, did my master's there. I was an assistant strength coach and then assistant director under Rick Franzblau. And then I was lucky enough after being at Clemson for 5 years to get my first leadership opportunity at Mississippi State University. So moved over to Mississippi from South Carolina, was a director there for 3 years, was able to work with some really cool people there. And then once I was there for 3 years, I got this current role as assistant AD for sports performance at Pitt. And it's crazy to think, but I'm my fourth year here. So super grateful for it. And now I oversee strength conditioning and sports science. And same thing when I was at Mississippi State, I did a similar opportunity, but really excited to be on this podcast and just share some of my experiences with you guys.
As a strength coach, we deal a lot with Excel's, spreadsheets, and building out the best program that we can for our athletes. Although, when you have these large amount of spreadsheets and Excels and printables and packs that you need to hand out to your athletes, it can get a little bit overwhelming, especially with large amount of files. Mine's personally has crashed, deleted, and that to me is a big burden. That's why since starting my own business, I've went with TeamBuilder. TeamBuilder is an all-in-one programming software that has truly changed and leveled up the way I coach and the way I program for my athletes. With TeamBuilder, you can create customizable workouts, track your athletes' progress in real time, and even generate performance reports with just a few clicks. Athletes can also fill out their own workout data by using either the tablet or their smartphones in the weight room, which, most importantly, eliminates the paperwork that we all hate. This also gives your athletes accountability for their program and their progress as they are immersed within it. If you are interested in using TeamBuilder, head over to teambuilder.com and sign up using code PAChalkup. That's PACHALKUP to start your 30-day free trial. So obviously you've had quite a journey up until this point and quite big names as well to be working under. How was that experience for you, like going over and being under some of these like great coaches that are at these institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super grateful for my first opportunity. I worked under really Mike Joseph. He's still there at West Virginia now. Really gave me my first opportunity, and Daryl Bauer, to not only work with Olympic sports but with football, because that's when really the head football strength coach oversaw all of the sports, which it was really cool to see that infrastructure and layout from a leadership standpoint. So two great mentors that really pushed me outside my comfort zone, my first internship, and really taught me the ins and outs, and really allowed me to learn, like, this is what I want to do, and without that first opportunity, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And then after that, just being at Pitt, that's when Kim King was here many moons ago, with like, she was hired by Buddy Morris, when Buddy Morris was at Pitt. So yeah, just some legends that have kind of come through the University of Pittsburgh, as we all know. And then when I got down to Clemson, Dennis Love was there. He was the director at that time. He had left to go to the Denver Broncos, and then Rick Franzblau took over. So those two guys being great people at just Clemson, to learn from and develop from. And I really got to see that program grow at a high level. They just redone the weight room, renovated all that. And that's whenever I got to Mississippi State. Lucky enough, Anthony Paroli gave me that opportunity to go over there and lead and be the director of Olympic sports and work alongside him. And I got to renovate that space, build things out, hire staff, really start to build out sports science there. And that's where I really learned that academic collaboration is really important. I was working heavily with Dr. Ruben Birch with the engineering department to work on a certificate for athlete engineering. So he really allowed me to see, wow, like not only in athletics are there great people, but academia, there's some really intelligent people on that side of the house that can help us do our job at a high level and continue to learn and grow from a professional development standpoint. And then that leads me to Pitt. Chris Hoppy, administrator, really gave me the opportunity to come here. Mike Stacchiotti, the head football strength coach, he had been at Mississippi State and he had let me know about the opportunity. And I'm super lucky to get to work with people like him here at Pitt. But then also, we do have partnerships with the academic side of the house as well with the School of Rehab
Mhm.
Sciences. So them just kind of seeing that I had done that at a prior university, coming up to Pitt, working with them with our sports science master's program. And then also we have the neuromuscular research laboratory too. So I think just throughout these stops, it's important in whatever university you may be at, never kind of overlook the people on the other side of campus. If you're working in athletics, it's easy to kind of get your head dug in the sand and not really open up to, wow, there's great resources for your interns to go talk about like resume development or cover letter or really just professional development alongside just some of these different unique collaborations to do research as well.
Did a podcast with Sachin McDonald. He is a private facility strength and conditioning coach in Seattle, and he was talking about like different ways that you can build out your not just resume, but like your self as an S&C coach. And he actually took acting classes to go from different ranges of like, okay, I need to be calm, and then now I need to be hyped, and him being an introvert, that sort of helped him come out of his shelf as well. So like give him that range to just be more than Sachin McDonald, but now he's Sachin McDonald, the strength coach, and then just bouncing between. So anytime that coaches talk about like different like outside the box type courses or like speaking with and workshops, I think that's always such a great thing to do because like you also add so much more value to yourself.
Definitely. And I think this last year I've challenged myself to, I've been lucky to get opportunities to speak at more unique conferences just outside of like the sports science and strength conditioning realm. One being like collaborating with our physical therapy school, and speaking at a PT type conference and talking about like the data that we collect within our space, but how does that really fit into the return to play process? And there was another conference that we did for Dr. Freddie Fu. He's a legend here in Pittsburgh, but it was more talking about ACL return to play in particular. And it was a lot of like physicians, doctors, all that, just presenting in front of different groups of people and how they put on conferences is vastly different. For the ACL one, I had a presentation slot of 15 minutes to kind of talk about a case specific piece, and everyone kind of got up into their 15 minutes. There were some round tables, but it was really, really interesting to see just how things are kind of carried out on more of the medical side of things. And I've been trying to challenge myself in that regard to get outside of the sports science and S&C box and kind of push
Mm.
myself into uncomfortable situations to make me open my eyes and then maybe bring some of these ideas back to some of our performance related realms as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask with sort of being shaped by all these like legends in the S&C and sports science world, what are some of the sort of things that they taught you and how they implemented that teaching into you as a young intern and then coming through the ranks?
Yeah, I've just learned that no matter where I'm at from a stage in my career, I still have more to learn. And I think our field is really just like getting started. I think from a strength and conditioning side of things, like sport coaches really understand and respect that role and what they need to do to kind of service the team. But really starting to hiring our first ever director of sports science here at Pitt. It's been quite the journey of just educating, performance team members, sport coaches of how this new performance realm kind of fits into the model. And you have to be patient, with a lot of new things whenever you're coming in. And I've tried to really learning from my mentors. One, you have to have a relentless pursuit for knowledge, and then two, you should show that like I understand and respect all the other like cogs in the wheel, you know, so whether it's sports medicine, nutrition, sports science, strength and conditioning, sports psychology, you know, I want to learn more about those areas. Clearly, they aren't my space of expertise, or I don't really, I'm like more of a generalist of just trying to understand it, respect it, and understand how it plays within the performance team. But yeah, just being a lifelong learner, no matter if I'm literally an intern coming in or like sitting in my role now. There's challenges in every role, and really just problem solving, you know, and finding
Mhm.
solutions, then trying to like prepare and read into the future, right? We know we have like a lot of different challenges coming our way with just the college space and how it's changing. But what can I do to best prepare? And I can never think that like I've arrived. You know, I'm constantly like in pursuit of learning, attacking new challenges, and just keeping my ego aside and being humble. And like what you're doing, Manny, I have so much respect, like talking to different professionals in the field and learning from them. Like, I think if you're talking with someone, they think they have it all figured out. Like, I don't know. I just try to surround myself with people that are like minded, that are going to continue to push me.
Mhm.
And whenever I'm doing hiring, I'm looking for that. Like, I'm looking for humility. I'm looking for someone that wants to learn. Clearly, work ethic's going to be really important, and I got that from all of my mentors coming up in the field.
100%. I am often, so I get the opportunity to speak to a lot of people, and I do my own research on the side as well. Like my research area is female athletes and menstrual cycle and how that impacts their physiology and performance and some of the psychology aspects of it as well. But like, I don't know if you're the same, but the more I read into it, the more I study, the more I research, it's like the less I actually know, because there's like so much more you could chase after. And like what you've been saying, you can look and pick at other fields to really look at how different aspects happen and sort of affect that certain thing. Like one of the biggest things that I've learned with my research area is that although all females are different and monthly cycles can be vastly different with the same female, let alone different females, but culturally there's a lot of differences as well. So like some might be very reserved, whereas like you don't talk about it, you don't even like acknowledge it, whereas others are like more open and honest with everything that happens. So for me it's always like, let's speak to the person first and figure out how they feel about it and if they're comfortable enough to even talk about it. But you always chase that next thing, like what can we do better to like better understand this thing.
Yeah, no, I think, and sometimes, especially in the sports science realm, I think it's common like an ebbs and flow, right? Like at first, when I was at Clemson, and luckily football was doing really well then, they won a national championship, and we had like an influx of all of this money, and it's like, oh, our budget is X amount. We can kind of buy any piece of tech that we want. So then we bought literally everything we can get our hands on, but then you have to make sure that you have the infrastructure and the people to run the tech, you know. So then I got to Mississippi State, and I'm like, all right, I know what worked really well, you know, and what pieces of technology we had and information we were collecting to really make decisions based off of. So it's kind of like almost simpler is better. You know, maybe we have three pieces that we're making decisions off of all three, and maybe we're kind of diving into some new research on one more additional piece. But yeah, just things coming kind of in ebbs and flows of just understanding what's important to the entire performance team. What are we making decisions based off of? I know that's said it like three times, but it's really important, right? Because a lot of people will
Hmm.
collect all this data, and then it's like, hey, on the back end, how are you deciding like changes in training? Maybe you're doing more. Of course, everyone thinks you're always doing less, but what are you really utilizing to make the best decisions for your student athletes is the most important thing, right?
100%. And it's also understanding like how that specific piece of equipment, what it actually means as well, like understanding the why behind the test that you're implementing. Like if you're using VBTs, like what adaptations are you wanting your athletes to chase? Like same with catapult, what are you actually doing with the data, and what does that mean for like load management or any type of like recovering from like the performance or the game or something. So it's like it's actually understanding the why, and I think that's where sports science and SSC mesh really well. Is like if you've got coaches who dabble in both, like yourself, and I kind of wanted to get your opinion on it too, the management of both, because that's a different beast in itself. But so how have you sort of adapted those two industries, and how is it running at Pittsburgh for you?
Yeah, I think because a lot of us coming up in the field, we just organically kind of had to do both before this department was really built out. So when I started at Clemson in 2013 and we started to make some investments around like 2015, 2016, I was the strength coach and I was the sports scientist running the testing assessment, the data collection, then pumping out reports on the back end. Clearly, my reporting back then probably doesn't look like the reporting that we have now because we do have um, new practitioners with specific skill sets around coding, whether it's R, whether it's use Tableau, like whatever your skill set lies in, and I think that's where sports science, we've had such a wide array of interns come in, and also like students in our sports science master's program, like some have been more in data analytics, coming up, some have been more in engineering, and then some have been more of like an exercise science, physiology type background. So we're getting a lot of different kids with different backgrounds coming into specifically our master's program at Pitt, which I think is great, and really figuring out as I go from one weight room to the next, or one team to the next, like maybe a sports scientist for baseball in particular is only looking at like our diamond kinetics data, spin rate, exit velocity, and then measuring that and like laying that over with some of our metrics from the force plates, looking at gym wear and things like that. But maybe another team like volleyball, I'm expecting, or basketball, I'm expecting the sports scientist to not only like run the testing and create reports, but also help with some of the return to play cases. So our low minute players, maybe they're helping do some conditioning work with them as I'm on court with the rest of the athletes. So I think depending on the team that you're working with, identifying how are you going to utilize that sports scientist and then making sure you're marrying that skill set alongside with it, and then the other big curveball, we've kind of brought data analytics and sports science on the map at the same time, and just understanding kind of what data is being organized and pumped out of either. So maybe data analytics is more like looking at peak game time to have a football game to have the best like viewership rates. Like hey, if we have it at 3 p.m., we'll have 3 million people tune in. If we have it at 11 a.m., we'll only have 500,000 tune in. So or even like managing the transfer portal and things like that have been more in our data analytics space just at Pitt. But more of the performance metrics have organically fallen into sports science. But I think the pro model has been doing this for a long, long time before us. And now clearly, like all things, the college space is trying to adapt. So what I try to do is reach out to a lot of the colleagues I respect in the professional setting to kind of, hey, talk to them, what curveballs were they thrown,
Mhm.
just like learning situations, and then bring it to my space and be like, hey, I know we're a little bit different and our resources are X, but just kind of having those conversations and learning from the people who have already done it is always super important.
I always go back to this thing where you probably would know that these people are who they are by their social media, because like the coaches that me and you probably look up to have zero social media at all. So you're just kind of like, is this the right guy? With sort of the different management aspects of your role, how how does that look day to day for you?
Yeah. So I think coming into this role, when I left Mississippi State and I was a director of Olympic sports strength and conditioning, and coming into more of a assistant athletic director title, I was just thinking, I was like, man, I'm going to be sitting in more meetings, I'm going to be managing more people. Clearly, my heart and soul started like training lots and lots of teams on the floor. When I was at Clemson, I worked with over, I don't know, 19 different sports, just understanding whether it was field sport development, plyometric training, speed development, rotational sport athletes. So I think I was super grateful to have that exposure to a lot of different teams, and I definitely, probably my toolbox got built out the most there when it came to actually X's and O's of periodization, because I went from helping with men's soccer to baseball to tennis to diving, volleyball, track and field. It really allowed me to speak the language of a lot of different sports. So whenever I sit in a role like mine now, if I have a recruit come in from any sport, I've probably worked with it, I understand it, and I can kind of throw some type of pitch out there. But in a leadership role, you should be able to sit down with any head sport coach and have that conversation and problem solve. So I do sit in a lot more meetings, but usually I wake up. I do train one sport still, volleyball, because that was my bread and butter when I played in college. So I think it's important right now. Like I'm not that old yet. I still like to stay on the floor and coach a team, and then just still be in it. Still be in that applied setting and seeing what problems are happening. Like what can I help solve, not in my day to day, but like if I'm dealing with this in my current situation, I'm sure there's other strength coaches or sports scientists dealing with it in the other 18 sports around me. So I really enjoy still being applied with a small group that's manageable. And then usually after that, I'll go to some different specific meetings. Like I'll meet with our director of sports science, Zach Witherspoon, kind of talk through if we're hiring students. Like right now, we're hiring 2 positions. Talk to him about how that's going, go through some candidate pool things, like talk about what's important for what we're looking for in those roles. Um, and then once we kind of talk about that, right now we're doing sports science master's student placement. So we get all the applicants to our sports science master's program. Really, ideally, we talk about where they're coming from, skill set, and they kind of prioritize what teams they want to work with, like 1, 2, and 3. So maybe Joe Schmo likes football as his number one choice, men's basketball number two, and volleyball number three. So interviewing and organizing all of those, and then I do lead our all performance meetings. So like all of our performance team heads from whether it's nutrition, sports med, psychology, or mental health, sports science, of course, strength and conditioning, and then administration, talking about just things on the horizon. So like one example is we're adding new teams to our conference, being in the ACC. We have to go to the West Coast, so adding Stanford and Cal, and heading out that way, as you know, because you were on the West Coast at one point. But kind of what are we attacking when it comes to student athletes traveling, across the country, and how can we attack that time change of 3 hours,
Mhm.
and how can we make sure performance is peaking, give them the right skill set to make sure you're going to bed at this time, make sure you're hydrating on the plane. So all of those bigger conversations, and then of course, I mean, state of the state is just getting ready for all these different changes coming in the next year, really 25, 26 of roster management, what's coming down the pipeline with that, and really just figuring out what's best, from a budgetary standpoint I oversee.
Mhm.
But really just, I really enjoy my job because half of it is just, I mean, more than half of it, but I need to hire the right people around me to make all the areas go, so I think talent selection and recruitment, and really just creating an atmosphere. And I know culture is corny, but creating a space where people know when they're coming to Pitt, and working in our sports performance department, like this is what you're getting. We're pushing continuing education. We're always pushing the envelope to continue to get better. We're giving the best services to our student athletes and sport coaches. And we're open for like feedback, and we're really big from like a character standpoint. Be humble, clearly be confident, but so that's kind of like a
Mhm.
happy medium, and just be a lifelong learner. So I just like to
Yeah,
keep things clear and concise.
100%. And you kind of touched a lot on some things that I would kind of want to dive a little bit deeper in. But one of the things that you've just said is culture is corny. Like, it has been overused, but I don't think it's ever corny because, like, that your whole program depends on the culture that is built around either coaches, athletes, staff members. So I don't think that's corny at all. And I really learned what building culture and what that actually does when I was across there. Like
Yeah.
in the UK, like culture is built, but it's more like reserved. Like there's not really like any other rah rah stuff that happens in the US, which I'm a big fan of. Um, so going across there and really seeing that happen and how that actually impacts the program, I'm a big fan because like I don't know. I think your athletes trust you a little bit more when they see like a little bit more of that human side, that passionate side. So yeah, strategies. What's some of your strategies for building that culture and really making sure that from staff members to staff member and like athletes all have that common sort of expectations culturally?
Yeah, I think it all starts in the hiring process, and like for me at Pitt, when I came in, there were a lot of staff here, which were great. So I had to sit down and meet with them and just talk about like, what are my expectations? Because you owe that in a leadership role to your staff. This is what I expect of you. Let's talk about, and I think it's really cool because every strength coach has their own teams, right? Like you're leading men's basketball, women's basketball, volleyball, men's soccer. So you're your own leader of your own team, and I never try to micromanage people. I think depending on where you've been at, you can think about all your different mentors and bosses over time. But I hired different coaches for different teams for a reason because they have different skill sets, right? And different personalities. Like if I'm talking with, let's say, our volleyball coach, and he's like, man, I want someone super extroverted to work with our team. but also really understand plyometrics at a high level. And then I go out and I bring in candidates, and they're all like introverts and super quiet, and they kind of like to sit back and just look at the data. And yeah, it's my job to find the right fit for the right team, and then throughout that hiring process, just get them to understand what I'm looking for, not only for that specific sport coach and that team to work with, but what am I looking for from an administration standpoint, a budgetary standpoint, and really just bringing in the right people within the atmosphere of that. So culture for us is just right fit for that sport coach and that team,
Mm.
plus just the whole entire administration and athletics department, what we're looking for, and then specifically sports performance. But our athletic director does a really good job of just getting everyone to understand what's the mission and goal for the athletic
Yeah.
department. And then we kind of take that into our subgroups, sub leadership groups, and kind of lead that within our model.
Yeah. What's your sort of take on building a relationship with the head coach, and how do you build out that trust and respect so that they can also buy into the program that you're developing for their athletes?
Yeah, it starts with like when you get to a school and I start working with a sport coach, like I go into their office and I ask them a lot of questions, and I really try to understand where they're coming from. And I did this when I got here to Pitt. I'd met with every single sport coach and I had a long list of things. And one, I think that's super important to just get to understand where a sport coach is coming from is like, hey, what are your past experiences with strength and conditioning and sport science? And that opens up a whole can of worms, and usually they've probably had multiple strength coaches throughout their career, and they can articulate like, hey, I really like this in season. Hey, I didn't like this in season. Off season, my expectations are this, this, and this. Like these are conditioning tests I've done. These are performance tests I've done. And usually you can get a really good understanding of a lot of the time if a sport coach hates the weight room, there's an
Mm.
underlying reason. They probably had a bad experience in the past. And it's your job to kind of figure that out and find small wins. Like maybe they pull their team out of the weight room altogether, and it's like, hey, you know what? Can I get, let's say, like our return to play kids in the weight room, step one. And then they're like, all right, I'm seeing small wins with those kids. Like maybe I will put the whole team in there for one day a week, find some more small wins. But sport coaches, I think, like we got to give them more credit in regards to they probably sit in a space, they have a philosophy or a feeling towards like whether it's the weight room or some of the sports science numbers for a reason, and it's our job to kind of ask the right questions and figure out where they're coming from, and then kind of bring whether it's the research, if that's what they respect, like bring different articles to them of why it is important, like if it's for distance runners and bone density and you're having a lot of stress
Mm.
fractures, like, hey, maybe we can get them in a couple days a week because I see this is important from the research. And then they'll be like light bulb situation. But it's your job to figure out how to get through to your head sport coach. And that doesn't take one day. It might take a whole
Yeah.
season. So that's where it kind of goes back to patience of understanding where they're coming from and showing that you care. Like it's important to go out to practice. If you're not, let's say, a football strength coach warming the team up every day, and maybe you have three teams, like if I have wrestling, baseball, and gymnastics, like it should be a goal of mine to maybe get to one practice for each every week. It's an unrealistic expectation to go to every single practice, but just a lot of time we expect sport coaches to come up to our space, but then if we're not willing to go down to theirs, like that's probably not a winning relationship. So I think insert yourself into practice, ask if you can be in team meetings, asking if you can be in film sessions to learn the language, and the different
Mm.
formations on the pitch, let's say. So I think the more that you can kind of dive into their space, and if there are things you don't know, like it's your job to dive in and learn more and ask questions. And
Yeah.
sometimes I've seen small wins with like an influential assistant coach to the head coach because you have to understand your head coach is a really busy person. So maybe they have like a right hand person that writes practice or does like a lot of their long term athlete development or their recruiting, but get with that assistant coach and talk to them about like, hey, what's our recruiting model? What are we looking for in these recruits? Then you can understand better once they get on campus. What do I need to build them into for like our DNA for our team?
That's actually like a quite interesting take, because I've heard obviously go in and understand their language, understand how they speak about certain movements and the movement efficiency that they are looking for whatever sport it is. I've never sort of heard anyone talk about like if they're really science based, show them research articles targeting whatever their pains are, or just that way of managing. Is that how did you sort of come out about with this philosophy, and really trying to manage that tricky situation with them?
Yeah, I think a lot a lot of my hot takes one would say would be around like if I'm coming into a new school and I'm taking over a team, and I'm like, man, we've had a lot of groin injuries. Like, and then I kind of reverse engineer and look at, well, we were running a conditioning test every week, let's say. This is an example. And you're like, all right, like you're running the beep test once a week and we had a lot of groin injuries. And what kind of like can we add in Copenhagen's before practice? Can
Mm.
we so I think
To
a
offset
lot of
that
times
push.
for us, yeah, for us as strength coaches is you have a problem presented to you. You need to find a solution. A lot of our sport coaches are very intelligent people. They have a master's degree. Maybe they did an exercise science, but versus you just being like, we should do this just because. Well, that's probably one, not going to work. And then two, not going to register for your athletic trainer or your sport
Mm.
coach. So I think bringing the research, and you should be up to date with the research and reading different pieces. So I think just whether it's looking at muscle fascicle length, and things like that, but for Nordics or whatever else may be out there in the world. But I think it's our job to become better educated, in our spaces because strength and conditioning in particular, we don't have like there's not many strength coaches with PhDs. Sports science, yes, a little bit more research back, but I think if you really want to get your point across with like the medical field as well, having research articles is only going to help better support where you're going
Mm.
with things in training.
Yeah. What's your take on periodization and how that works with a team over a whole season? I've got my take that I've discussed thoroughly on this, and I'm coming from a you. There's always something that's going to happen to ruin periodization. So being gung ho on that exact periodization is going to probably drive you mad at some point. What's your take on periodization and how these different factors may affect it?
Oh man, periodization is because I oversee 19 sports, so like I got to
That's why I
start.
wanted
I
to
got to
ask you.
zoom out to like 50,000 foot view of first thing, as we all do, is talk about key performance indicators for these different sports, and figuring out what's going to make this athlete elite, an elite jumper for volleyball, for an outside hitter, let's say, right? I have that talk with our sport coach, right? Now let's talk about the whole entire year as an annual plan. Like we have some elite volleyball players on our team. So some of our girls are playing all year round. We play in the fall, then we have a spring season, then they play on Team USA, and then we're back in the fall. So periodization, our girls are playing all year round. A lot of time that's with basketball too, with their competitive schedules and things like that. So volleyball, for example, like for us in season, we do carry out microdosing for preseason into the fall season. Really, from August to December, we're doing microdosing, and then we have a traditional strength training model the rest of the year. So just figuring out that's what's best fit for us to really lift before practice every single day, and then on
Mm.
the road as well. From a periodization standpoint, it's usually like a strength, power, speed, game day, CNS primer type day, game day, off day. And we do that from, yeah, August to usually December, end of December. And then, like right now, for example, in the summertime, we're really trying to accumulate some work capacity and volume to kind of have those strength residuals to carry us through season. So we have 6 weeks. We usually do like a 2 week eccentric block, a 2 week ISO block, and then 1 week of power. And then we start preseason, and then we'll carry over power again. And
Mm.
then we kind of run it all back and, yeah, start microdosing. So I think it's just case specific. And for all our different teams, like if you look at a baseball, they play 3 games a week. They play on like a Wednesday, or 4 games a week. They play on a midweek, and then they play Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's really just looking at that specific sport. What are the KPIs? Like, what are the testing and assessment we're going to run with that sport, and then figure out periodization around that, talking with your sport coach. And really, like, your time restraint with college sports is tough because you don't have them for a certain time of year, as we all know. So just figuring out like how to handle those times that they are with you versus not with you, and doing periodization with all that. Plus, if they're playing, like this is an Olympic year, so we have some athletes playing in the Olympics, and competing in the Olympics. So figuring all that out so they're peaking at the right time. I know it's a very loaded answer, but yeah.
No, and I think you touched on some really good points as well. And it's that strength, power, and then everything sort of falls in after that. Can you sort of give us a reason as to why you pick strength, power, and then build out that way?
Yeah. No, I think so. Usually for our strength day, that's going to be more of like let's say like a squat day for us and like some Nordics. So a little bit more like the eccentric based, and then our power day is gonna be more concentric, like a trap bar deadlift. And then our speed day is gonna be more of like a fast hang clean. And then our CNS primer day may be like a med ball slam, like a lot of med ball work on that day. In between game days, a fast
Mhm.
clean, maybe an overspeed jump, or something like that. So really just trying to get us to peak and prime at the right time when we're playing
Yeah.
2 games a week. When we're playing 3 games, it gets a little bit stranger.
Just so people are a little bit more aware of microdosing means and how that's sort of implemented, can you describe how that all works out for you guys?
Yeah, it's usually, I mean, we're just giving the minimal effective dose to give that stimulus to the student athlete. So we always talk about dose response relationship. So I'm giving them a dose of something and I'm seeing how they respond. And that's what I'm talking about when we're really building that work capacity and that strength, like really in the summertime leading into it for 6 weeks. So those residuals carry on and hopefully like help out in regards to getting us from August to December. A few things that I've seen really great about microdosing. So how we lay it out, and I'll just say ACC play because that keeps it a little bit simpler. Our preseason schedule is crazy traveling across the country.
Mhm.
But we play on Friday and Sunday, and Monday is usually our off day. Tuesday will be our longest lift day, and we're always lifting right before practice. So instead of, let's say, doing like a 15-minute warm up on the court of glute bridges and knee
Mm.
hugs and jogging back and forth, like we decide to do a minimal effective dose, right, to help us really prime and prepare for practice at a higher level. So our longest lift day is usually that furthest day out from game day. It's going to be that Tuesday, and it's usually 25 to 30 minutes. And that's where we're getting like an explosive movement. We're also getting our big squat day, and we're usually using a gym aware of some sort. We're going to jump on the force plates that day, of course, as well from a readiness standpoint, but utilize the gym aware for specific speed, depending on where we're at in the training block and all that as well. So that's gonna be our longest lift day. As we get closer to game day, the lifts get shorter. So maybe it's 25 minutes, 20-ish minutes, 15 minutes. And really the second day is gonna be a lot of our unilateral work. And like I said,
Mm.
trap bar deadlift, concentric type work as well. And that's gonna be more of like a 20-minute lift. And then as we get that day out, it's a 15-minute lift. That's more of like a speed type day. So it could be like an explosive step up, a hang clean, our Olympic movement, a loaded jump. It could be trap bar jumps, depending on the student athlete, kettlebell swing. Yeah, and then we hit game day, and then we, depending on like the one thing you have to think about microdosing is like I do travel with the team on the road because we lift on the road. So if we're playing on the road or
Mm.
at home, it could change. So I think you have to be extremely creative and adaptable. Of a lot of the time, I can get in a weight room on the road. So maybe we were going to Duke, and they're like, "Yeah, you can come in and lift," or Miami. But say if the weight room's closed on a Saturday, maybe I have to ask them to like leave some kettlebells in the gym, and I have to use bands, kettlebells, and med balls. But usually, like a lot of schools in the ACC, they're awesome with letting us get in and utilize their weight room on a Saturday. But especially with female athletes, I've seen that if you do the traditional strength training model, let's say in season, which there's nothing wrong with it, if you're lifting your team once a week on a Tuesday for an hour post practice, like there's a lot of things possibly working against you, right? Like they're coming from a 2.5 hour practice, they're probably dog tired. The lift's
Yep.
going to be a grind. They'll probably be like, man, I hate seeing my strength coach. This is terrible. I only see you once a week when I'm really tired, and then go on with the week, versus I've seen it great for relationship building up. I see them every single day. We're lifting every single day. It's just normal, especially for the freshmen that come in. Like we only have 6 weeks in the summer if they come in early to get them up and ready, and you get them to a good point. And then when you only see them from an exposure standpoint once a week, they're lifting IQ and things like that. Like when you're lifting once a week and maybe you get, I don't know, 16 lifts in versus you see them 3 to 5
Mm.
times a week, getting those exposures from a technique standpoint and trainability. I've seen like freshmen in particular become way better lifters in this model, and really just athletes enjoy coming in the weight room again in season because they're coming in before practice, right? And they see it as a way to like prime their bodies to get ready to go. And as I've had athletes go on and play pro, it's something that they've still enjoyed doing when they're playing internationally and whatever else of, hey, this gets my body ready to go. Like, why aren't we lifting before? before we go to practice. When they start to lift after practice again, they're like, man, my body does not feel great. Like I can grind
Mhm.
through it, but if you really want to get maximal exposures, a specific dose, and find a way to utilize that lift to prepare me for practice, it's definitely been a great tool to add into the toolbox. But there are some cons because if your weight room is really far from the practice facility, like I can't lift. Like we're set up that our weight room's right above the court. So like we lift, we
Nice.
walk down a set of stairs, we're at practice. Like if in proximity your weight room's not very close, like I've been in other places where you lift, you got to drive 15 minutes across campus and then you're at practice. It's like that's going to make things tough. Or if you don't have, like I have a pretty large staff where it's like me, a paid intern, our sports scientist, like we come in, we jump on the force plates, they come over with me, we lift. If I have like a more senior group or a more speed specific group versus more of a like strength accumulation, like freshmen, whether it's freshmen or return to play, or something like that. If you don't have a big staff to kind of get kids through fast, it can be tough as well. So it's no perfect tool like all things, but it's definitely been great as an in-season tool for me. And I picked it up from Corey Schlesinger. When he was at Stanford, I was at a conference and I heard about it. He's the goat that I heard it from. But yeah, NBA, it seems to be pretty popular, even NHL as well, just because
Yeah.
they have a lot of games within a week. So I think there's a lot of great people doing it. And I like all things, just called around and asked some questions to people, and then we did it. So yeah,
Yeah,
done
I think
preseason
basketball's
too.
a really good example, and I think I watched this video from the Suns, and they spend like half hour before their game, just like what you're saying, really priming themselves. Like they'll jump on flywheels, they'll do some like prep to be explosive, and I think that's it goes back to that preparing your um, brain for what's about to happen. Because if your brain's prepared to be explosive and fast and twitchy and reactive, things are going to go so much smoother for them because decision making will go up. Um, like just their own field vision as well. What's your sort of take on the the cognitive prepping as well between different sports?
Yeah, I think I mean athletes are all about routine, right? And we're really big on like you have to be able to recreate these environments at home or on the road, right? Because I mean, depending on the team, like some teams travel way more than others. Football's not on the road as many days as like a men's basketball. So recreating that environment, and we like cognitively, we've utilized Synaptic in the past at different schools. With some of like the vision testing and vision boards and things like that. But yeah, I rely and lean into our sports psychologist, Bernie
Mm.
Holiday, heavily with that, and he works in MLB. So I think there's a lot of really good research out there, and resources within staff that if you see something out there, like kind of making sure you kind of pass it around the right people, that it's like, hey, do you think this is a good idea? And some of like, I mean, routine is huge, and kids figuring out what their routine is to kind of get their stress to the right point,
Mm.
because they're always gonna, depending on how big the game is, like you just need to, whether you're journaling or whether you're cognitively, you have to um, wear the synaptic glasses, and the strobe. But yeah, I think we lean heavily into a lot of like our mental performance coaches when it comes to some of the cognitive stuff, because we're
Mm.
lucky to have great people.
How do you use the VBT systems or gym aware when you're sort of prepping and microdosing your athletes?
Yeah, we use GymWare specifically around like that furthest day out, from game day. So we'll kind of overlay from a readiness standpoint. I'll have them jump on the force plates, and we'll get that from Hawken. We'll get those numbers for our weekly force plate report for our head sport coach. Of course, we wear Catapult daily, so we're always monitoring them at practice every single day. And then also we'll layer in gym aware for that squat day. So say if we're in a speed power type block and our speed for squat is zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.8 or something like that meters per second. We'll just make sure, hey, are you staying within the range? Can we push it today? Can we not push it today? It just depends on, like we all know, if I have a freshman starting for us, like, and they're not recovering as quickly in between
Mm.
games as my super senior, since they had COVID year and all that. You got kids that are 17, you got kids that are 25. Like it's crazy the age of some of these kids with the portal and everything else. So I think just making sure that we're adapting at a fast rate, and if it is a freshman or younger athlete, like we can change the weights according to what really the goal is for that day from a BBT standpoint. We do use gym wear and it's great.
Mm.
But yeah, trap bar jumps, you can use that too to get jump height and things like that. But yeah, really our big squat day is the day we'll use gym aware for, and really overlaying that with the force plates and then catapult metrics. It gives us a clear picture of what's going on. So we're not just reading too much into one specific metric. We're kind of layering them in so we can make the best decision going forward.
Yeah, on that, you've kind of been mentioning catapult a lot, and it's a section I want to really get into because I find that area so much, like, there's so much excitement that can be put towards it from a load management, but also a speed development and sort of that acceleration versus deceleration. What's your sort of principles around that area, and how do you what's your take on sort of catapult and speed development and speed sort of training in general?
Yeah, so we have multiple sports with catapult at Pitt. So we have court sports of both basketballs and volleyball utilize catapult. And like I said, we use it with volleyball. And then field sport wise, lacrosse, football, and then both our soccer programs. So we have a lot of information coming in from catapult depending on the team. And what we really use it for sport coaches is just like we created drill library. So you're talking about like opening the pitch up to get high speed running, and then closing it down to get more deceleration and cutting. So we usually take the top 20 drills, let's say for volleyball, especially as we're kind of going into preseason to start programming, top 20 drills, and then we'll see elicit like drill per minute. How many jumps are we getting for our outsides, our middles, and then our setters? Ideally. And then same with like the soccers as we're going through prep phases and preseason. It's like, all right, top 20 drills from acceleration, deceleration, high speed running, cutting, really layering in, like depending on the day, layering that in with the weight room work. So if it is like a high speed running day and we're opening the pitch up and we're
Mm.
looking to achieve that goal, making sure we kind of marry that with our Nordic day, with our high hamstring work. So we
Oh,
know it's
okay.
eliciting that. And then if we're closing it down, and looking at like a smaller pitch size and it's a lot of cutting, marrying that with like our Copenhagen's and things like that, just to make sure like whatever stimulus it is that day, we're kind of hitting it hard because we know DOMS, as we all say, like that's going to set in the next 48 hours. So we really need to like capitalize and work that day hard, ideally.
Yeah, can you just um try and describe a little bit or go into a little bit more in depth the so like for your high speed running days you do a lot of like hamstring Nordics, but for more of your acceleration decelerations you go more into your Copenhagen's and sort of more adduction abduction. Can you give us like a little reason as to why and how you've seen that benefiting your athletes?
Yeah, I think it's all about talking with your sport coach. And for us, as we're going into season, like you have to plan out your week around your game day, right? Because we have to be peaking and clicking on all cylinders. So making sure that you're getting that again minimal effective dose of if we know our biggest training day that we're trying to elicit high speed running to keep the hamstrings strong and resilient. If we know that's going to be, let's say, our Tuesday practice, like you can't expect to turn around and do Nordics on Wednesday when you did all your high speed running on Tuesday and you're going to be super sore. Like you really have to get the most bang for your buck on that day. So we try to elicit, and I mean, soccer's an interesting one, right? Or football, because you're in the UK.
Yeah,
But
I was wanted to correct you so badly.
yeah, no, I wish being in America, there there is an American football and it reigns supreme.
And
But
then
yeah,
me and at UW talking about football, and they think I'm talking about American football.
yeah. No, being
Those
in
two
the States, it's a
conversations.
different world. But after being in the UK and even Australia, it's interesting to talk to everybody over there. But yeah, just eliciting that stress, that dose response of if we know we're going to have all our high speed running on this day, and you have to keep athletes fit, and handling your top off guys or gals with soccer is a whole other beast. If they're not playing many minutes, but just figuring out like, okay, if this is gonna be our high speed running day, maybe you have practice, and at the end of practice, you literally have. I've seen people with Eric's pads and mini foam rollers. Like at the end of practice, you knock out your 3 sets of 3 Nordics, and then you're on your way. Like sometimes you don't even have to go to the weight room. If
Mhm.
your soccer coach isn't a big fan of that in season. So I think there's always a way to elicit that response. And yeah, you want to double down on that day because that's going to be your only opportunity to knock out let's say Nordics or high hamstring stress. And then with the Copenhagen's, I've even seen it sprinkled in if you need to get a groin or adductor strengthening movement, and maybe they're not coming up to the weight room because it's too far or not enough time. Like you can always do it in the warm up before practice, or you do it post practice. Again, you just grab a partner, lift them up, whether you're doing
Mm,
ISO hold or taps or things like that. But yeah, when you're closing down the pitch and doing a lot of cutting and change of direction, doing it whether it's before, as a preparatory piece or a primer piece or at the end of practice, but you really want to make sure you're dosing them in an intelligent way that, yeah, if you're going to do Nordics the day after a high speed running day, good luck, because they're going to
yeah.
have a lot of residual soreness. So we just try to double down and maximize that day. And again, it all comes down to what dose are you trying to give the athlete that day, and then clearly what response are you going to see the following day, because you don't want to we do wellness check-ins, but we have practice and we know it's a high jumping day, and then the girls rate the next day like, hey, yeah, I'm a little bit sore. We're expecting that to be the response, right? Because that's how we kind of planned out practice. But
Mhm.
if we're at the day before game day and all of a sudden the next day we get to game day and you see a lot of hamstring soreness, like coach is probably not going to be too happy with you. So you want to do everything you can to kind of predict what soreness is coming about. And that's why
Mm.
I think the drill library and utilizing catapult in that regard is super helpful.
Yeah. What does the load management look like for having specific target, like exercise specific, and then jumping and running and using those muscles again?
Yeah. I think me personally, I've tried to get away from load management because I think it's gotten such a bad rap as of recent. Like especially with the NBA and all the articles coming out, it's like we're sitting people out of games because of load management, which is like completely like whoever's writing that article and that prerogative, like that's up to them. But for me, it's all about like peaking at the right time, and I need to give that student athlete the best chance to be successful in their sport. So I always look at positional averages, right? And I'm like, okay, last year when we played a 5 set match for volleyball, like I know they could get up to 250 jumps. So that's going to be the highest amount of jumps we see in a game. So I need to get to that end point. I don't need to be there right now at the beginning of summer,
Mhm.
but I know we need to get there and touch that before we start preseason. So I think just understanding what time of year it is, what's the training block. It goes back to periodization. What's the goal of that block? And I know like reverse engineering where we need to get to at the end of summer. I need to build them up to that amount of jumps. I know load management a lot of the time that'll come into if we are going to use that language, and we're really big with language, like I want the student athletes to know that like availability is key, and being
Mm.
available to play in games. So if we need to figure out like what's that perfect picture for them, let's talk about that. Like if I have a freshman athlete versus a fifth year athlete, like their training plans in the weight room probably aren't going to look the same, but we're still going to try to get the most out of them. It's just maybe someone's on K box versus the other one's doing, a front squat because they just got here, so yeah, load management's a tricky one because I think when you talk about load management, everyone expects to just do less. And it's like, no, like
Mm.
sometimes we do need to do top off runs because you didn't play it all, So like load management, I think,
100%.
yeah, it's hard because I think that's where sports science has gotten a bad rap because they're like, all right,
Mhm.
sports scientists always come in and they say load management, do less. And it's like, no, a lot of the time it's half your bench is sitting. You got to do
Mhm.
more. You got to keep these people fit and ready to go in case someone does go down. Like this person's ready to hop right in. So I think,
Mhm.
yeah, I've clearly it's in a lot of articles and people use it a lot, but sometimes I think like it gets a false narrative
Uh,
a little
I,
bit.
I
Yeah.
should have probably specified when I'm talking about load management. I'm talking about like whatever they do in the sport. Obviously, sport specific movements in the gym is bullshit. You can't do it. But what I'm talking about is like what you've said. Like how many times are they jumping in like their most competitive performance? Can we at least get somewhere close to that number? Or my favorite as well is like looking at people who have been on the bench. How can we bring up their load by making them like do some shuttle runs or some jumps or whatever it is post game, like take 10, 15 minutes on the court after everyone's gone home, and they just finish off and top up their sort of gas tank, let's say. I should have maybe specified that a little bit.
No,
um,
you're fine. But these are a lot of the conversations we sit with sport coaches, and they'll be like, load management. So you're telling me to do less? So I
Mm,
think it's always because they only see it in like negative articles, out there in the world of sadly the X world and
mhm.
Instagram. And it's like, that's why I think one, like specifying language within your performance
Yeah.
team, not just like me and you, because like we're easy and we're able to have this
Mhm.
conversation, but yeah, I think a lot of the time when people hear load management nowadays, like at least in our space, it's like, yeah, them sport coaches always being told you do too much, you do too much.
Yeah,
It's like, well,
100%.
I
Like
have to
when
get my athletes ready to play in this game. Like
exactly,
we got
exactly.
to take 10 more jumps because they got to get this like technical or tactical skill
Mhm.
down, in some way, shape, or form. So it's super interesting.
When you were talking about like we're very specific with our language, in my head I was like, oh, I should have maybe specified what I
Yeah,
meant by
you're like, what about me?
um
This is good. This is
the
good.
the one thing I can't remember when I read it. It was a while ago, but it was an S&C coach, and he was talking about jumping, and he said something along the lines, "I get my athletes to jump and then some." So what he means by that is like, say we're doing like a max jump effort, we're always trying to give them a a bar to where they're jumping to, right? But how are they going to improve? Because to improve, you need to uh, progressive overload, right? So jump higher. How are we going to do that? So his thing was I asked my athletes to jump, and then on the next jump, I set a bar, like a sticker or something, even like just a little bit higher, so they can jump and some. And it's that thing of that constant pursuit of progressive overload by even if it's like a competition, I love competing with my athletes and I love setting competitions for them as well. So it's that thing of, oh, he jumped this high, you have to beat him. Like you have to beat him. Or else like he's going to talk a mad shit to you. Like and I love talking crap to athletes as well. Because like obviously the relationship has to be there. I don't just like go up to a random athlete and start
Yeah,
talking trash.
I
Like,
love it.
but there was this athlete I was with, and he's very competitive American football, but he was a long snapper, and obviously special teams doesn't get much attention on the field, but in the gym he was amazing. Like he was one of the strongest ones. So for that, like every time he hit like a PR or like a big number, he would come up to me like, "Did you see that? Let's go!" And I was like, "My granny could do that, and she's dead." So like he was like, "Coach, that's fucked up." So it's always that thing of progressing and like how to get the best out of your athletes. What are some tactics that you use to really make sure your athletes understand what you mean by pushing that extra little gear?
Yeah. I mean, I'm lucky that the one specific team that I work with right now, our standards are already very high. We've been pretty successful. We went to three back-to-back-to-back Final Fours for volleyball. So I think like sometimes I have to educate them that like less is more, to be
Mm,
honest, because they'll be like, I want to come in for extra work every single day, and it's like, hey, well, how about like we're training every single day. I just need you to lock in for this session and don't worry about like
the
being
next.
here and then coming for more, because sometimes like, yeah, education of depending on if you're only getting your student athletes once a week, that's way different. Like I see my kids every day because we always talk about want to versus have to mentality. So like I want to get my vertical up, I want to squat, I want to do this, I want to do that. So, but from essence of an athlete, long-term athlete development coming in, even though this is kind of a thing of the past because of the portal and we don't get kids more than 2 years anymore. But like it's our job and it's our job to do due diligence of if you have an athlete coming in, I think sometimes it's like how strong is too strong depending on the sport that you're working with. Because I have a lot of extremely athletic like female athletes, but if they can already squat 2 times their body weight, like having different benchmarks for them to work off of that like there's only a certain end of I don't need you squatting the house slow as heck, that's going to drive down your vertical. So understanding that like I have progressed different girls to different training modalities, whether it's utilizing isometrics, whether it's like maybe they are doing a K box, a flywheel centric instead of doing a really slow back squat rep or something like that. So I think just giving them different stimuli to make sure they're driving up adaptations to, again, it goes back to your key performance indicators, or we call it like our DNA for our sport. Like we talk about different positions on the field or the court, like what do they need to be able to do at a really high level. And it's our job as like performance practitioners to get them to that point. I think I've slowly tried to get away from saying strength and conditioning coach because everyone just assumes you're banging around weights and just like getting really strong in bench and squat. And it's like, no, I look at what we're doing on the court at a high level, whether it's like cutting and changing direction, running at high speeds, jumping really high, and how can I elicit the right response to get them better at that? You know, I don't need them to be really good at benching for volleyball. Yes, it's important to have like clearly strength through the
Some
upper body, you know, to keep shoulder health and things like that. But what can I do to really help drive up those KPIs and make them good specifically at what they're doing on the court?
I'm often now saying high performance coaching because, again, it's exactly what you're saying. Strength and conditioning has that, and like again, I'm a massive me head. I love weights and I love banging weights and making a lot of noises in the gym, but that's not all that we do. Like we are an industry where we're looking at KPIs and how to like get those 1% betters every single year. And like at sport, it's different because you can't improve every single week, every single month. If you get 1% increase a year, that's a lot.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's like we're at that point where we got to make it to like that last round to
Mhm.
win the national championship. So we're like looking at every single thing we've done the year before to see like what can we do better, you
Mm.
know? And it specifically comes down to like skill sets that we see on court. Like, did we have an injury occur that we could have, you know, like kept from happening and things like that. So, um, but yeah, I think really in this day and age, you need to educate your student athletes, especially if you're working with a sport that is going to go on to be pro. Like if you're working with a men's basketball athlete that's going to go play in the NBA, like it's your job to educate them. Like, why are we doing these movements? Why is it important to your sport? How's it going to make you better in your position? How's it going to keep you healthy? Why is nutrition important? Giving them these skills that, like, when they go on to the next level, and I know they'll have resources there, but just understanding why they're doing it, you know, and that'll only help them buy in more to help their performance on court or on field.
It's looking at our industry as education as well. Like if we educate our athletes on the right practices or what we aim to be the right practices, when they get into these professional roles and they've got some sports have enough money to hire their own strength and conditioning coach, they know what to look out for. They
Mhm.
can already be like, actually, I do really well with strength based to start off with, then power, then speed development, and all that stuff. They can actually make those informed decisions and be like, okay, he's actually not the right coach for me, or he is the right coach for me as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's even interesting because I have student athletes, like one of my ball players, she's going to do the sports science master's program. So,
Mhm.
like, we have the next generation of student athletes, like, being sports scientists or being like, we've always, like, I was a volleyball player in college and now I'm a strength coach slash sports scientist. But, like, I was lucky to have a great strength coach, Corey Twine. Now he's with NASA, actually, which is really cool. But long
Spoke to
story short, but like, it's really cool when you have your student athletes like go on and work as a sports scientist or strength coach because they see how much it impacted their personal playing career. So they want to go and give back and make that their profession. So it's kind of
100%.
coming full circle, which is cool.
Yeah, one of my college lecturers said, more chance than not, you're in this industry or you're in something to do with sports because along the lines you've had a really good experience that made you think, I want to do that and help out the exact same way. And like having spoken to some like the people I go to for advice, like that's the reason why I'm here. Like I'll never forget that. Again, I was in high school. We had finished like playing for a cup game. We lost badly, but my teacher came up to me. Was like, just me. Like he pulled me aside in the classroom and was like, "What could we have done better? Like in your opinion, what what could we have changed?" And like just having that ability to voice my own opinion, like set me on this path of wanting to give out that to my athletes as well.
Yeah, no, I think I was super lucky to have a very elite strength coach when I started my career, and Corey's Wine made me want to like stick around and train all year round, like stay in the summer and lift and train summer session 1 and 2 when it's voluntary. Because I saw just the impact that it had, especially me because I'm only 5'3". You can't tell because I'm sitting down, but very undersized player to be a collegiate volleyball player at the D1 level. And I knew I had to maximize, the weight room to get my physical potential. So getting faster, getting better at change direction, and just becoming more athletic, and stronger. And sadly, I really didn't have like a college or a high school strength coach, because back then it was just like your football coach or your track coach was your strength coach, at least
Mm,
in my space, because we just didn't have very nice weight room, and all that. So now that I can like give back and create a better environment in that regard is super, I'm super grateful for it.
100%. What's your take on bucket filling, and how do you utilize buckets when coaching at Pitt?
Yeah. So when you say buckets, like if I bucket my athletes in different groups, is this true?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
say like the speed, power, strength, and what one lacks, you can sort of fill up their bucket a little bit more with some of the microdosing that you spoke about.
Yeah, I think when we're in season, I'll look at the team and I usually have a conversation with the sport coach about like what's our starting lineup, who's going to be playing and who's not going to be playing is going to be the first conversation. So we have 16 girls on the roster, and I know like these 10 girls are going to be like contributing a lot on the court and these six are not. Then I already have two buckets, right? I have starters and
Mhm.
non-starters. So I know these athletes, the non-starters, are going to be the ones that could probably handle a little bit more volume, a little bit more workload and a little bit more conditioning in that regard. And that's going to fall usually furthest day out from game day. And sometimes even I create opportunities for their off day. Like if you're a starter, you're usually doing more stuff in the athletic training room recovery wise, or I mean, the weight room's always open. So if you want to come in and do more conditioning work in that bucket, if you're a non-starter, then that's always a day that you can capitalize. And same with that Tuesday as well. A lot of the time, as you know, like your non-starters are going to be your younger kids, so they
Mhm.
can physically develop a lot more. You can do a little bit more volume with them than the starters. And then usually the starters, like we have a really old group of kids that have kind of been in the program for multiple years, just because yeah, they fell in that COVID group. It should be like the last go around with COVID kids, and then we should have phased those out by now. We love them though; they've really capitalized on their playing career. But we'll usually
Do
put
you see
them
that as a
into.
benefit, like a positive thing or a negative thing?
I think the extra COVID years created opportunities for student athletes to get a free master's degree, which is great. And a lot of them, like maybe the sport coach didn't plan to have them an extra year. So maybe we've seen a lot of kids, like we've gotten them for a 1 year transfer, and those have helped us kind of like get to a final four or whatever else. Cause like coaches plan really, really far ahead, as we all know, for scholarships and things like that. But when the COVID thing happened, it's like, oh snap, maybe I don't have another year of scholarship for Susie Q at Michigan. So now they're going to take that year at Pitt, or so I think it's been interesting. Like I've now had student athletes, they'll show up in the summer, I have them for 6 months and then they leave, so it's like my job as a strength coach to figure out like, all right, if they're coming in with these injuries from another school, how do I get them healthy, within 6 weeks? Hopefully I can. It's not a serious injury. And then as we start season, like it's my job to get the most out of them because then they're done in December and then they're off to whether they get drafted to play pro or whatever else. So I think it's forced me to become more creative because I've gotten athletes for way shorter periods of time versus like when I got in the field, I was out of Clemson as a GA. I'm like, oh, I'll have this tennis athlete for 4 years, like no big deal. Now it's like, oh, I know I have this kid for 6 months. Like, what am I going to do about it? How am I
Mm,
going to get the most out of them and squeeze every ounce of that lemon out? And and sometimes it's like, is it worth? Let's say, for example, they've never Olympic lifted. They're here with me for 6 months.
mm.
Is it worth me teaching them how to Olympic lift? Are they going to become proficient enough? And not right, wrong, and different, but can you like skin a cat in a different way? Maybe you do like a loaded jump, continuous jumps with a barbell or a trap bar jump or med ball slams or a jump onto a box or whatever else. So, but yeah, I think it's forced coaches to become more creative now that we've had kids for shorter periods of time, especially with that COVID year.
That's an interesting point. I didn't know that some transfers could be as quick as that.
Yeah,
Um, it makes sense that obviously your development plan for that athlete's going to look a little bit different when you don't know if you're keeping them or not.
yeah. Or they're just a one and done is what we like to call them. So, but like you're gonna get the most out of them, but also you're like, even I mean, on court or on field, it's like, all right, what you just gotta literally prioritize like
Mm.
low hanging fruit. What do I know I can get them better at? And then like long term athlete development is the things you just have to prioritize. Like these top five things they have to get better at. These five things, or maybe, like we can they're an added bonus if we can get it done.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What's a hill that you would die on in S&C?
Hill I would die on. Let's see. I mean, one thing that I know we need to get better at, and I'm continuing to try to find solutions, is just our way of evaluating if you're a good strength coach or not. Our evaluation system is could be way better, and I only say that because like I feel like a lot of strength coaches, it's like, okay, your head sport coach wins a lot. Like you've been undefeated with this football program or basketball or volleyball. Like, but it doesn't mean that you get a lot of wins. That means your sport coach is really good at the X's and O's, and you probably have the Jimmies and the Joes to win. But like, are you a great strength coach because your sport coach is, always 12-0? Does that
Mm,
correlate? So I think just finding a better way to go about evaluating strength and conditioning coaches is probably. I mean, it's something I'm actively like trying to do better in my leadership role as well. How do we sit down and evaluate? Am I good at my job? As the strength coach for pit volleyball. And people may say like, oh, it comes down to player availability and injuries, and it's like, I mean, I feel like that's a multifaceted approach of that probably has to do with your athletic trainer, your
mm,
dietitian, your strength coach, your sports scientist. Like I think that's a even though sometimes strength coaches take the brunt of it, like, oh, so and so pulled their hamstring, it's your fault. Like I don't think that's the best way. Like the pointing and the name blaming is not the best way to go about it. It should be a collective kind of piece, like stressor that everyone carries of like, hey, we had two season ending injuries. Like, how can we do better as a performance team to make sure that doesn't happen going in the next year? Because I think you're going to talk with like whether it's it could be your AD, it could be your head sport coach, it could be your head AT. I don't know, but like when you're having all these conversations about player availability, especially as we start to pay players more and more money as we go on, like it's gonna be important to start to do a better job evaluating everyone within the performance team. But yeah, I think there
How
could
have
be.
you how have you sort of been analyzing these roles and their effectiveness, or what's your suggestion to analyze the effectiveness of the strength coach?
Yeah, I think I've been having a lot of conversations with different professionals from all over the world about how they go about this, and and clearly like how I look at men's soccer S&C coach, um, where like clearly energy system development, speed development, like the KPIs for that sport, that practitioner should probably have a specific skill set of how to develop that versus maybe a men's basketball where like plyos and really plyos, change of direction, speed, just looking at the KPIs and then making sure that really the S&C coach is elite in that area. And that's why I think like there's a lot of different skill sets to go around. And I've been looking at Martin, I don't know, Boucher, I could be saying his last name wrong.
You're saying that right.
Um, okay, but he has a lot of really good resources about like really just how to evaluate your staff. And I've had a couple great conversations with him, and he has a great accent. So I'm jealous. I just have an American
It's the
accent, unlike
French.
you guys. But I think he has a lot of really good resources out there of how to go about evaluating your staff, and some good articles that you should probably check out. That's been helpful,
Yeah.
at least for me in a leadership role.
No, he's an amazing guy. I've been fortunate enough to sit down and have dinner with him and like really pick his brain on different situations he's been through at different clubs, and it's been weird to see some of the pushback that we also get as S&C coaches.
Yeah. I think just always building alliances with the other performance team members, that's why I don't think anyone should be pointed the
Blame.
blame of something like that. It should be like something that's carried between the whole entire performance team and like taken personal. It's like, hey, we want to keep everyone healthy. If someone does get hurt, like I was talking about, whether it's like a groin injury or a hamstring injury or like a knee injury, like we should all be working together cohesively. One, to get the athlete back, but then two, figuring out like how did this
How
occur,
to
and
mitigate.
everyone using their data that we have collected objectively, and that's where the sports scientist comes in handy. But creating those visuals and helping with those conversations. So yeah.
Yeah, that's something I've never really thought about, and I mean it makes sense because specifically in the US, like there's a lot of S&C roles that come up all the time because it's so fast paced and people are getting booted and staying and whatever else. So figuring out in a way to really figure out, okay, is this person being a good thing for the program or like a not so good thing for the program? I think that's I've never had that one either. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah. No, I think, but yeah, if you ask me about a hill I would die on, I think like we only need to continue to better evaluate ourselves as practitioners, you know,
Mm.
and first you have to identify like S&C roles for different people look different. And whether you have like your five football strength coaches working with one team, you have men's and women's basketball, they only have one team, but then you have like some of these Olympic sport coaches that are working with three teams, you know, like expectations of covering three teams versus one team, you know, having five strength coaches for one team. And so I think there's a lot of different roles, which makes the world of S&C really, really interesting. But yeah, having more conversations about how we can continue to push the field forward and
100%.
evaluate ourselves at a high level.
It's what you're saying, like really diving into like new reads or research articles and like just expanding that. And like and I've been honest with everything, and I probably say every single podcast. This podcast is very selfishly for me. Like I love learning and speaking to
Yeah.
different coaches and how they perceive the industry and what they do. But I'm just in a fortunate enough position to film it and post it for everyone, which I like helping coaches as well. So I get loads of messages being like, "Hey, this is what I'm currently going through. Like, what do you recommend I do?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Get in contact with this person. I'll send emails being like, hey, he's looking for a place. Is there anything that you can offer?" So like, I 100% agree that like to become better, you have to actively seek out either conversations or new reads or some way to further develop your knowledge on what you're doing.
Yeah. I'll grab a book actually too, because I know you wave
Yeah.
on fast, but the one that from Martin that I was just kind of referencing before I had the conversation with him, I read his Eagles book.
Yep.
So I'm moving it across slowly like you, being like Vanna White, but yeah, exercising your ego in high performance environments. But I think, yeah, hey, that was really helpful. And then I was like, oh, read this book, got in contact with him. And that's the one great thing when I talk to like sport coaches, they're like, wow, it's crazy how like the performance world, you guys are so willing to share information and talk about things that you're kind of going up against. So I think that's something on the flip side that we do really well is we're willing to talk training and
In the
and really
US.
yeah, in the U.S.
The US.
Well, Manny, you can impact over there in the U.K.
That's what I'm trying. No, like I've had quite a lot of pushback in Europe, and it's in one way I get it. Everyone's kind of we're at the stage where everyone's like trying to protect their jobs and their roles. Like
Mm-hmm.
in the US, you're a little bit more friendlier with sharing knowledge and really getting to know each other's program and helping out. Because roles across here don't come across so often, we just like we guard it with everything that we can. But I hate gatekeeping, so I'm like, oh, you've got a question on speed performance. Sweet, I know so many people that do speed. Let me ask them the question, see what they think about it. But yeah, it's getting better as well. It's getting better. But
Yeah,
yeah, the US is definitely a lot better at sharing.
definitely. Well, we're doing maybe something right, so that's good.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what's your PR song?
PR song. Oh, I don't know if I can like say it out loud. I love some Buck Cherry. I'll say that.
Okay.
So if you go to Buck Cherry and you see some songs, probably the top three on Spotify, mine's within that. So
Yours is within the
yeah,
I'll pull it
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared. Don't read them. It could be a bad word. But
Yeah,
yeah,
okay, I will not.
Buck Cherry's probably some throwbacks, but I'm a fan of the band.
I've never heard of them, so I'll put that on the way on the drive
Oh,
home.
love that.
Um, when you're doing conditioning, what's the playlist you throw on?
Oh man,
They're
I
two
love some
vastly
like
different.
I love some throwback, like some Tupac and things like that.
Ooh,
So I like some rap for sure.
fun fact:
Yeah.
"Hit 'Em Up" is my PR song.
Oh, let's go.
Like
Love it,
that
Manny.
song gets me fired up.
Yes, yes. I've gotten some of my paid interns in the past for strength and conditioning. They love like WWE soundtrack type stuff, and I think
Okay,
that's amazing. Like John Cena, like oh man, we have some wild music that plays. But at this point, being in a weight room this long, I listen to
to
just about
anything.
anything.
Um, I had two sports psychologists in an episode that's coming out after this one,
Awesome.
while in the future. Um, but he was saying that his walkout song would be, it was like, I think it was Home Depot, like their song. I was like, that is definitely different. That is
That's
different.
very different.
Like, and again, I'm not in the US. I don't know what that song is, but I can
Yeah.
imagine it's like some elevator type music.
Yeah. Very interesting.
To finish off, what's one piece of advice that you would give new strength and conditioning coaches or coaches wanting to come into this industry?
Man, I've always lived off of like get comfortable being uncomfortable. I think, and I've talked about like earlier in the podcast about getting uncomfortable and not in a way that like is bad by any means, but
Mhm.
you should insert yourself. Like if you're in an environment where like you're around people that, man, I'm not the smartest person at the table, that's good. That means you're in a situation where you're learning. And if I've gotten really good advice from a lot of mentors of you see people in sport or athletics, like you look at the resume and it's like 1 year here, 1 year here, 6 months here, boom, 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 boom. Like for me, whenever I'm at like a university or institution, it's like if I'm continuing to feel like I can build and grow and like my ceiling's higher there, like there's no reason unless you get a phone call about a really, really good job or something. Like don't be so quick to just like up and leave and
I'm
quit on the
sure.
situation. I think I've learned so much of like seeing a process through, and especially leadership opportunities, because when you get somewhere, like when I got to Mississippi State, it like takes a full year, whether it's like you're renovating a new weight room, you're building on a new staff, you're putting processes in place. Like if I left after that first year, like man, before I
You'd
kind of
never see
finish
it
out the
fruition.
next 2 years, I wouldn't have seen really like it's kind of like the flywheel effect from good to great. Like I just got the flywheel moving. It wasn't even starting to like propel and get itself really truly like building momentum. So I think don't be in such a rush to like look for the next job. Really like look at the situation you're at, look at the people around you and how much you can learn from them, and continue to push and grow at that spot. And most of the time, like my job opportunities came from people calling me and being like, hey, we have this position open. I wasn't like sitting on Indeed like applying to a bunch of stuff. And when I got in the field, I knew nobody. Like I don't like it's
Mhm.
not like I have family members that were all coaches or something. Like I literally got in the field. No one in my family's ever done my profession. They were like, "What is this job you're trying to do?" So I think, yeah, just do a really good job where you're at, and things usually take care of themselves. And people will be willing to make phone calls for you and things like that.
That's how I built out my time at UW. Is like I had the summer internship to be like, I have however long it was to make sure that they knew my name afterwards, right? Because like they'll probably see so many interns, but I want to be the one that's remembered for doing something right. Obviously, it could have went either way, but thankfully it worked out. But like the more X's I crossed off, the more reps I got in, the more responsibility that was getting added towards everything that I was doing at the end. And like I always like to think that me, as soon as one session finished, already set up for the next. I think that's really what gave me that edge to really make that experience the best for what I did. And then again, like what you said earlier, I would jump in between the nutrition staff. I would jump in between the PTs, although I couldn't do much with either, but I could at least like help stock the fridges, like just pick their brain on contrast training or whatever it was, so I can also build out my knowledge base as well.
Definitely. No, I think those small organic conversations actually accumulate into something really, really special over time. And yeah, like even having a quick conversation with your PT about BFR, like, oh, I see you doing like this and this with this athlete. Like, I want to learn more. And yeah, I think the more you try to respect like the other areas within the performance team and learn more about it, the more successful you can be and more well rounded, as a practitioner
100%.
to speaking the
I,
different disciplines.
I think it can help you out, like building out programs and the way you like your principles as well. Like I think if I wasn't in a position where I sat with Ali in the nutrition talks. Like I'm looking at nutrition completely different now. I'm not just looking as important for recovery and fuel, but like they need to feel good as well. Like their guts need to feel good to perform at the best. So I'm not going to just like, if I know they're feeling shitty, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, let's do the hardest workout ever.
Yeah. I think just, yeah, having those conversations and understanding, yeah, where they're at, whether it's talking with the PT, the AT, and then, yeah, the student athlete's the most important thing.
Mhm.
And it comes back to having that relationship with them for sure.
100%. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming on. I really do appreciate you and giving up your time as well for this.
Oh my gosh, Manny, thanks so much for having me on. Great conversation. And I'm excited to tune into more episodes.
Perfect. Again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Awesome. Have a great day.